Hello, I'm Dr. Catherine Horton. Previously, in the previous video, which was a short 5-minute summary, I summarized essentially how to fight psychopaths, and I also summarized all the previous videos about psychopaths at the root cause and how to recognize psychopaths in organizations, and so on. And I have now, in this series about psychopaths and how to fight them, I've now reached the point where I moved from fighting individual psychopaths to fighting psychopathic systems. And psychopathic systems are those where essentially you have deep capture by clinical psychopaths at the top. These people have their own enablers because they do work with enablers a lot. And the enablers are what I term the weaponized morons. And overall, the system is malfunctioning badly, and it's harming people in one way or another. It's maybe even maiming or killing people. All these things are possible when you're dealing with psychopathic systems. So now I am doing the second part of the series about how to fight psychopathic systems in particular. And this is a much more challenging task because, in a sense, you are dealing with a network of psychopaths. So one psychopath is bad enough. Anybody who works in maybe forensics or crime investigations knows that when you have a psychopath, for example a serial killer or something, it's a major headache because these people are nuts, right? But when you have a system in deep capture, imagine you're not just dealing with one person like that, you're dealing with an entire gang, right? And these people are networked. They will have people like them in other organizations. And that's what we essentially have in the world today. We have deep capture by clinical psychopaths in our biggest and our oldest organizations. This has been going on for a very long time. People have been harmed. They lost their livelihood through that. For example, in the banking sector, psychopathic systems have destroyed thousands of lives, thousands and thousands and thousands of families, if not millions. They've devastated entire countries. These are psychopathic systems in deep capture by clinical psychopaths. And you have to remember that this has not always been thus. This is now a new trend, and in a sense what we see around the world is the clinical psychopaths who have deep captured these organizations have reached critical mass. This means that they can shape the system on a very large scale because they essentially imagine many of these systems next to each other representing the army, the intelligence agencies, government, pharma, weapons industry, and everything that can be seriously deadly. And imagine at the top you've got these nut jobs essentially everywhere. This is what we're dealing with. So this is essentially, I called it previously, the war on civil society, because essentially you have degenerates declaring war on the normals. Those people are not psychopathic, not seriously disturbed in the head, and not perverts, not corrupts, not criminals. So what we're dealing with, and I think there's lots of evidence to support my view, is essentially deep capture by criminal elements, by clinical psychopaths and all that. I class them all as, the degenerates. Maybe that's because I'm emotionally involved being a victim of these idiots, but also I think there's plenty of evidence to support that view because they are degenerate, they are not normal, they certainly do not represent the majority, thank goodness. And they are psychologically disturbed, and a lot of them are mentally ill. They are mentally ill. They are mentally deficient in many ways. And we have to recognize that this is the case, because as soon as you realize that what you're dealing with is essentially mentally ill people who are not quite full in the head, you realize that you mustn't take it seriously what they're doing. You must not, because it's essentially an expression of their mental illness. It's not an expression of good government policy or good business strategy or good financial planning by any means. They are living out their own degeneracy, and the quicker we realize it, the quicker we move on to actually dealing with solutions. So the overall situation is that we have the intelligence agencies running amok. I am one of the victims of the intelligence agencies, in line with thousands and thousands of others. I have been stalked and harassed. I have been, I think, probably chipped or infected with nanoparticles. They are non-stop shooting electromagnetic weapons into me. since January 2016 overtly, but I was attacked with electromagnetic weapons way before then. I'm essentially fighting for my life, but I also, because what I am originally as a particle physicist who then changed to the study of human systems, I have spent years analyzing the economy, the financial sector, currency systems, many other things, employment and especially unemployment and so on. And I have discovered that pretty much everywhere our systems are what my generation would be called thoroughly fucked. And everywhere the pattern is exactly the same. Everywhere these systems have turned essentially psychopathic. And if you want to understand what a psychopath is, you could watch films like The Silence of the Lambs, or you could look at past cases of serial killers, and so on and so on, and you will see that these people are very disturbed, quite out there, and what they have in common is essentially a total lack of empathy, a very calculating, ruthless way of isolating their victims and taking them over. And typically psychopaths eventually move on to maiming and killing people to reaffirm their own power. This is essentially the ultimate power a human being can have, which is to maim and murder another human being. And one step up from that is to maim and murder lots and lots of human beings. So this is what we're dealing with. So if we're now coming across systems that are severely psychopathic and are maiming and murdering a lot of people, that's why. It's not because it's normal, it's not because this is how the world has always been, no. It's not because this is how the world always will be, no. This is the reason for that is that everywhere around the world we've got these pyramid organizations, hierarchical structures everywhere, in companies and institutions, absolutely everywhere. You will recognize this is an organigram, and you will recognize this organigram. Sometimes there are departments, sometimes there's not 2 but 5 and so on, but overall you will have this pyramid hierarchy with the tapering to the top. As soon as you have that, you essentially have a deep capture machine. This is a deep capture machine. Deep capture is the ultimate end result by design. By design, you have to understand that. Why do we have this sort of setup? Well, I think it's because we're group animals and we are genetically predisposed towards following a leader. Some of us are genetically predisposed to be leaders. They are more dominant, they are more alpha, they don't bow to other people, they lead. They go ahead, they go their way and they don't listen to anybody. And other people can be swayed. Now this is there is a way to override it with your brain. So just because you were born following somebody doesn't mean you can't become a leader. That's the power of the human brain, okay? But you have to make a conscious effort. But what is certainly a given is that we are group animals, right? And then this structure is very intuitive because you have these groups following a leader who then in turn follow a leader and follow a leader. It's essentially in mathematics, this is a fractal. So it doesn't matter at what scale you look at, you see the same pattern more or less, right? This is a fractal. So our organizations are a fractal setup. So if you zoom in, you'll see this kind of pyramids. If you zoom out, you see big pyramids and so on and so on. And it's because you can put people together like that, and all you need is always a stronger leader with even more power displays and more dominance, and that's why we have that. But the bottom line is that we have these psychopathic systems that ended up in deep capture, and everybody's like, oh my god, what we're gonna do, how could this have been? Well, it's by design. It's not a bloody surprise we have these problems because it's essentially inscribed in every single organization we have. If you make a pyramid organization like that, you essentially just set the kitchen clock or set the timer, and it's just a question of time, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, until you get one psychopath into the organization who goes to the top and captures it all. Or actually, once I asked the question of what is the most common form of capture, and psychopathology is only 1% in the population, and this was, I think, at the end of the video about capture. The answer to that quiz question is actually human stupidity, because that's the most common form. So the most common form of capture is actually through stupidity. So you either have an idiot at the top or a psychopath, but both is really, really bad. So that's what you end up with, invariably. And I'm sure that we all have enough life experience to confirm one or the other. So now we need some sort of methods to fight these psychopaths. And there are certain methods to fight them. You just have to recognize what defines a psychopath and invert that to make it their greatest weakness. Now, a psychopath will have a total lack of empathy. They'll try to isolate their victims and, essentially snip all communication channels for that. And they take themselves incredibly seriously, and they are continuously trying to command respect. They have these power props and so on, like black limousines and chateaus and big buildings where the doors make you feel small because they're so huge, and it's like, wow, we're big and all this sort of stuff. That's very psychopathic. Normal people don't really mess around with that stuff because they don't need to. But as for a psychopath, this sort of, it actually also triggers arousal. They feel good about themselves, they feel powerful. Power, I think it was Henry Kissinger, who would know because I think he's a psychopath himself, he said that power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Well, yeah, for a psychopath. For a psychopath it is. Anyway, so this is what we're dealing with. So if you want to fight psychopaths who are at the key of psychopathic systems, and that's what we're doing, we're fighting the enablers of these psychopaths, and then eventually the psychopaths themselves, to recapture organizations first before we're going to remodel them and make them safe. For the first time in history, we'll start building safe organizations that are resilient against deep capture by psychopaths. That's the plan, okay? This is what we're doing, but right now we're still at the stage where these psychopathic systems are essentially killing us. They're killing me and they're killing my family. The idiots in the intelligence agencies have been attacking me now for half a decade, and they have been attacking me overtly physically with assassination attempts and death threats for over a year now. So it's kind of urgent. So if you want to invert this, as I said in the previous very brief summary, we will have empathy, we'll communicate with absolutely everybody openly, because opening the floodgates to communication is essentially the antidote to psychopathology. They can't, because the normal people, who are still the majority, will club together and turn on the psychopaths. That's what we're going to have. And that's the way to do it. So communication channels. The other thing is utter disrespect to the psychopaths. Total disrespect. You don't take that power prop seriously. And then humor. You mock them. Okay? And make it funny. Because if it's just disrespect and no high-class humor, then it's very defensive and very vulgar. And, I'm guilty of it sometimes because I'm just so fed up with these people. But if we can, let's train ourselves to just be funny by one way or another and utterly mock them into the ground. Do not take them seriously, because what they're doing is daft. So, essentially we will use empathy, open communication channels, disrespect and humor. This for sure works. I know that to work. And what are we going to do? Well, I said we're going to recapture the organizations from these moronic enablers and from the psychopaths. And then we're also going to go through a phase which is also very important, and that's essentially mending the systems and healing. Because a lot of people have been essentially been the victim of terroristic acts. And these days there's not just, the sort of what I would call, ballistics-based terrorism, where you have essentially, guns, or you have bombs and stuff like that. That's not the only terrorism we have these days. We have also financial terrorism, right? And essentially the collapse of several countries' finances is that. The financial crisis was financial terrorism on a large scale. There's also more general economic terrorism, essentially depriving people of resources, right? Then there's many other forms of terrorism. There's psychological terrorism, and gang stalking and this terror campaign is part of that. What other things I can say? There's also medical terrorism, by the way, it's affecting people's health, which is very similar to normal terrorism as well. But I don't just mean biological weapons. There's many other ways you can damage people's health, but it's another form of acts of war and terrorism. And there's also cyber terrorism, as we can and cyber sabotage as well. And victims of the intelligence agencies have experienced that prolifically. And there's many other forms. I mean, you can go through the list as well as I can. And there's, information terrorism as well, In a sense, you can terrorize people by feeding them biased information, by making them scared, and terrorizing them by conjuring a wrong picture. So psyops are essentially, information terrorism most of the time. There are also other elements, but that's what it is. So we're dealing with all these different forms of terrorism emanating from psychopathic systems and psychopaths. And what we have to do is counteract that, and we have to pick up absolutely everybody who was harmed by this, and we have to heal them, we have to repair everything, all the damage that has been done, and we have to mend. So what I'm about is essentially about empathy, communication, total disrespect towards psychopaths and corrupt people, humor if I can muster it. And then I am entirely working on healing, mending, repairing, and building new systems, resilient systems, which are resilient against deep capture by clinical psychopaths and all the other aspects. This is what I stand for. And essentially when the takedown operation started on me and essentially went full whack, that was in Munich zone next to the Bundesnachrichtendienst in Pullach. I was trying to start a company, and this company was exactly trying to do what I just said, which is counteracting the effects of economic terrorism. So starting with the high rates of unemployment and building a system whereby people can get back into work and essentially make the most of their own resources, their intellect and their skills in a way that was a totally different system. So this is what I am working on. But unfortunately then I became the victim of the BND takedown operation that they ran together with MI5 and MI6. And this has followed me now to Switzerland, where I'm now being essentially shot to pieces with electromagnetic weapons, microwave weapons, run by the previous two intelligence agencies in conjunction with the Swiss NDB. There we are. So I do know my share about psychopathic systems. So let's start. This is now the big picture. This is the battle plan, and I want you to also understand that this is a war. This is a war, but this time, let's not be so stupid to think that this is a war against specific individuals, like specific religions or specific nationalities. No, this is, in the first instance, a war of the normals on the psychopaths. That's what the real war is. It is the normal people against psychopaths, against a key core network of highly connected, very powerful clinical psychopaths. That is the war. And it is a war. It is a war about ultimate survival. Because what these psychopaths are doing is essentially murdering people in very large numbers. They've reached a stage whereby they have been killing individual people. That's where all this ritual sacrifice bullcrap comes in. It's essentially true, yes, that's true. They have been reaffirming their power by murdering children and women and vulnerable people for decades. And now they want to murder people in large numbers for the ultimate power aphrodisiac. It's just not going to happen. Because it's just not going to happen for the reasons that we have the internet now, and that's essentially exactly this communication channel. And networks are the most non-linear things we have on planet Earth. Our brains are networks, so of synapses and so on. That's why they're so non-linear. It is unbeatable. The mathematics of networks is absolutely unbeatable. And when you have a large network of essentially normal people fighting a minority of psychopaths, network effects already mean that the battle is won before we even got going. The question is how many people these psychopaths are going to kill before they realize that surrender is the only sensible strategy for them to do and to cycle with us to sustainable systems. Anyway, that's where we are. There are very few people who really have their head wrapped around this, so we have to kind of still communicate it to the psychopaths. So not really, on the, the front of the wave, shall we say, in this matter. But we are in this war. It is against psychopaths in the first instance, and in the second instance, it's essentially a war of systems. I am now, and for that, my husband, every time I wear this shirt, I didn't realize when I bought the shirt, this just looked like ivy to me, and I thought, oh, that's really pretty. And then the first time I wore it, he said, you look like urban camouflage. So, I call this now, since then, my urban camouflage outfit. And I happen to wear it as well, which is just as well, because I'm now talking to you about combat and war. But this will not be a bloody war. This will be a totally novel war. It's essentially a war of systems. And it is a war of ideas and a war of paradigms. And fortunately, some ideas are just more powerful than others. And some ideas are basically good and other ones are crap. So the good ideas have to win. And they are winning. And they are now becoming stronger and stronger. But right now, we're still in the battle zone. So as you've heard, I am being attacked. I'm being physically attacked, and it's not just about me. It's partially about me and the biomass, because they want to map my brain and they want to be able to build a supercomputer that can do what my brain does, and they hope one day they can, get new ideas by just trying to model my brain on a fucking supercomputer. I mean, this idea is shit. It's one of those shit ideas, and there are mathematical reasons for that, and reasons to do with quantum mechanics, why it's so shit. But that's a long story. At the moment we're at war. I am being actually physically maimed and murdered by these degenerates. So if you can join this war, then that would be really nice. I, for one, am not fighting with actual weapons. I'm not into violence whatsoever. I am fighting with other things. I'm fighting with mathematics and with ideas, which is in the end actually more powerful, and also more sustainable, shall we say. And that's what I'm about. I'm about resilient and sustainable systems. So this is now the prep talk, essentially, where this is now the episode which is about fighting systems, and I also term it essentially the Nazi hunt. Okay, and I call it the Nazi hunt because we have a lot of, and when I say Nazi, I also want in your mind to remember what happened during Nazi times, that disabled people, ethnic minorities, homosexuals, Jews, and many other people, and socialists as well, and communists, were murdered in large numbers. Essentially, those psychopaths ran amok, and they took any old excuse, really, to murder people. Then, it didn't stop with the Nazis. I call it the Nazi hunt because a lot of the experiments run on the victims are essentially, documented to be from the Nazi death camps. So that's why I shall refer to the Nazis. But I want you to be aware that the communists did exactly the same thing. They rounded people up, and at first they said they're just rounding people up who are not communists. They said they're going to round people up who are aristocrats or very rich, and eventually they rounded up absolutely everybody who disagreed with them. So again, we had psychopaths at the top, taking any old excuse just to maim and murder people for their own power game. Okay, so Nazism and communism, it's all the same. For me, it is essentially deep capture by clinical psychopaths, and to me it doesn't matter what they call themselves. If they call themselves like the Nazis or communists or the Illuminati or the Freemasons or, any other new brand or neocons, or I don't care. Because they're all psychopaths, and I don't really care about their power props and their little, networking clubs and the little, other sort of recognition signals that they have. It's all bollocks to me. It's total and utter bullshit. Ultimately, we're talking about psychopaths wanting to maim and murder people, and that's all that matters to me. So they're all the same. Okay. But for now, I shall call it the Nazi hunt, because what they're doing, essentially, is picking people, and now I'm talking about a specific case of the intelligence agencies running amok and murdering people, and maiming them, infecting them with nanotechnology, and planting them against their will by breaking into their home, anesthetizing them, and literally people wake up with scars the next morning from small operations where people use laser surgery to have very fine scars and so on. Crazy, whacked out nonsense, but it's true. Sadly, it's true, but a lot more crazy stuff has happened. Now, the people who are doing that sort of stuff are essentially Nazis, because you can also see the profile of the victims. I did a rough survey for my own purposes, and I came to my conclusion. I mean, this can be checked now with the big data set of victims who are public, and now in the next coming months, it will be checked. It will be checked. The entire community of victims and their helpers, will go through all the victim cases, and we'll find out if I'm right. But my assessment is essentially that the vast majority, and this, it's already been confirmed by other people, that 70 to 80% are women, of these victims. But then looking more closely at those cases, I also think that the vast majority seems to be ethnic minorities, seem to be foreigners like myself, and also single mothers with disabled children or other vulnerable people and so on, disabled people, old people in care homes and so on. So there's an extra, these groups, and they are all vulnerable, and typically if you think back, they were the prime target of the Nazis. So I am going to call it now the Nazi hunt, because and the Nazi hunt is for essentially these clinical psychopaths. That's the Nazi hunt. That those are the ultimate targets. The collateral will be these weaponized morons. That's collateral damage. And with that, I do not mean deaths, right? I'm not into violence. I mean administrative collateral damage, okay? And the ultimate prize is these clinical psychopaths who do this sort of stuff. But it is a war. And yes, I'm one of the, non-violent, combatant in that sense in the war of ideas. I'm not a real-life combatant. So under the Geneva Conventions, I'm an unarmed civilian, right? But in this war of ideas, I am a combatant. That's true. And we all have to fight, because this is about the ultimate survival. So this is now the plan, okay? And I want you to understand that this is a real fight. This war is real. You're watching this live. If you're watching this video close to the upload date, then you are watching it pretty much unfold live in front of your eyes. There is already a real life collateral damage, because their side genuinely does fight with real weapons. And they do maim and murder people. They have murdered a lot of people. Dr. Ronnie Kilder, the ex-chief medical officer of Finland, is one of them. But there's a very, very long list of other people they have murdered. In her case, you can see just what a bunch of pathetic degenerates they are, because she was a woman in her 70s. And they brutally murdered her. They essentially executed her publicly, which was a very bad move. That was a very, very bad move, because essentially when you do that, you activate the normals. When normal people see that, because we all have empathy, we activate and we're like, hang on, what the F just happened there? And there are many, many more people who have been brutally murdered. Many, many more. And essentially every single time one of us gets murdered, because we're normal, because we do have empathy, because there's this invisible link between us that psychopaths cannot understand, they don't realize that every time they do that, they activate people. And they activate people in the hundreds, if not the thousands. And the death of Dr. Ronnie Kilder essentially activated in the tens of thousands. So, and that you can check. There are many people who are doing what they're doing because Dr. Ronnie Kilder died, and I'm one of them. Right? That's essentially it. When she died, that's when I thought, right, it's official now. It can't get any closer to home. And there were many, many, many other deaths, So this is real. This is real. I can give you a very long list of people who've been murdered by these degenerate clinical psychopaths, and you can find these people yourself. In fact, I encourage you that you find these people yourself, because we have to essentially have three lists. One list is our heroes, the hero list, and that will be the total list of everybody who has been harmed or who has been killed by these degenerates. And every single time some of them, kill somebody, we put them on the list and we activate even more people. So that is our activation list. Our heroes list is to honor the people who fought for us so that we can even get here, right? And know what we're dealing with. And we are gonna not just sit and just worship them and that's it. No. We're gonna amplify their effect by activating, by taking that list, going through and say, oh my God, it's getting closer to home. I need to get on the case. So that's why we have the hero list. And on my website, and I'm still not finished because I was so busy, but there are three categories. They're essentially, right, you have the hero list, the people who already died for us, right, which is kind of connected with Rock the Boat. That's the list of the people who are still fighting. They're also on the hero list, right? So that's the hero list, the people currently fighting and the people who already died in combat. Then we have an actual hit list. And those are the people who can help us, and we'll ask them for help. And if they don't help us because of dereliction of duty, because they ignore court cases, because they kick court cases into the long grass, or police officers who don't help the victims, and people who have to help in an official capacity and don't, right? They are first on the hit list when we first think about who we want to target in this, in a good way, trying to solve the problem. And if they don't cooperate, or if they throw any nonsense, they go on the blacklist. And that's the third list. And the blacklist essentially are the people who have committed dereliction of duty, who were corrupt, who have actively committed crimes, or who have aided and abetted them, or who basically remained silent when it was their duty to speak up. That includes a lot of people, also journalists who've refused to report about this, right? And they are on the blacklist. So 3 lists: the hero list, and that's essentially our guiding, our compass, and our activation list, right? The second is the hit list. Who are the people we're going to ask to help us to recapture the system eventually? And we have to find out who is black and who's green. Who helps us is green and can stay during the recapture. Who's black, kicks stuff into the long grass, doesn't reply to emails, just goes la 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 la, I don't want to hear, even though people are dying. Well, they go on the blacklist because they're essentially Nazi collaborators. That's what it is. We have now large-scale Nazi experiments where innocent people are being mutilated and maimed to death. And if these people don't help us, even though it's their job in the system to help, then they're Nazi collaborators. They go on the blacklist. And we'll make sure that their career in that system will come to an end. For good. Forever. And now we're dealing with networked systems, free information flow. So once this is known, that information will never ever be lost from the system ever again. Should it drop off because people are using bots or AI to try to clear it off, it will be reposted by real humans. And it will be there forever and ever and ever. And once a human has loaded information into their brain, yes, they can go around and try to zap it out, but it's a bit difficult. And I don't think they've got enough of a time frame to actually do that. So this is what it is now. Okay. So that's it. So we are now in essentially the Nazi hunt. Okay. And I keep emphasizing that what we're going to do in this war of a war against psychopaths and in this war of systems, because this is what it is ultimately, a war of systems, I, for one, am not going to use violence. I think it's counterproductive. But what we can do, and is very effective, is use empathy and empathize with everybody who's in need around us. Then to communicate, open the floodgates and put everything out there for other people to pick up, because this is, on our side, amongst the normals, this is one big game of volleyball. I throw the information at you and you take it somewhere else and work with it and try to improve. And that's how we ratchet up, right? That's how we accumulate information. It's a ratcheting action, essentially going from below and, honing in on the key psychopaths in this Nazi hunt. And we're going to also use, for one, certainly, I'm going to use disrespect to essentially disable this entire facade of commanding respect from these degenerates. And I will try to use humor. Maybe it's not your sort of humor. Use your own and put as much humor out there, because we do need humor to just keep going. And also, it's a sort of recognition system or communication system, insider kind of authentication in this war, because weaponized morons don't understand humor. They're too freaking stupid. And then psychopaths, which is category C, right, out of the picture, psychopaths also don't really have that much humor. Some of them do, but it's a bit crap humor. It's all very like pulling people down, denigrating others. That's not really funny humor. It's just stupid. But normal people actually do respond immediately. So, you will recognize who's on your side based on the humor as well. So, And the goal is healing, mending, repair. So anything to do with healing, mending, repair, please post it below. This is what we're doing. We're recapturing, we are, identifying the weaponized morons. We're replacing them with genuine people, and then we keep going up, right? If we find a real psychopath, well, this person's gonna go to jail or some sort of safe containment, or they will be watched until the end of their life, because they're the real dangerous people. So now we have the situation where innocent people are on these watch lists by the intelligence agencies, who are in turn run by clinical psychopaths, but actually it's the psychopaths who should be on these watch lists, right? And what we're doing in this game is not a game, it's a war, right? We're trying to identify who is a real psychopath and who's a weaponized moron, right? Which of these categories, who's normal and just a bit scared and intimidated, well, those people we're going to encourage. Those who are weaponized morons, they've got to go. And those who are real psychopaths, well, they will be taken care of one way or another. I think we do have plenty of mental institutions, and instead of clogging them up with the victims of the intelligence agencies, we should start putting real clinical psychopaths in there. That's the plan. So I will stop it here, and the next video will be about fighting psychopathic systems with a lot more detailed examples, and I will also begin to attack the key architecture of these psychopathic systems, and I'll help you recognize how to spot them and how to actually attack it. But thank you very much for listening. I hope this was helpful. Comments are always welcome. Please do post them, because you can use my comment section to communicate with other victims and actually offer help, genuine help. We have to drown out the bots and the agent communications on my Twitter feed, and I don't censor anything, so I just basically put everything there. So should a comment of yours not appear, that's not my doing, it's their doing. Just keep reposting it until you can see it. Okay, so this is my advice to everybody. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.